Yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session entitled Exploring Digitalization and AI-Ready Laboratory Data. Today's presentation is brought to you by Astrix and is going to feature Richard Lee, who's the Director of Core Technology and Capabilities at ACD Labs. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment and just take a quick introduction of who Astrix is. We can go to the next slide, please. In terms of, why are we hosting this session, et cetera. So Astrix, if you aren't familiar with us, if you haven't participated in any of our webinars to date, we welcome you. If you're coming back, we're glad to have you back again. We're a consulting company. We work with a lot of different technology vendors in the life science space. We have been doing so for well over 20 years, 25 years, 28 years actually. We bring a very unique blend of specialized strategic and technical services, processes, technology, agnostic approach that have made us a partner of choice for many in the life sciences space. Everything from data analytics, lab informatics to clinical systems. Astrix has touched much of that, and 90% of our staff of over 600 hold advanced scientific degrees. So you are very much a science-based organization helping science-based companies, and have been doing so faithfully since 1995. So that's just a little bit about who we are. I want to transition quickly into introducing our speaker for today. So Richard, we can go to the next slide, and I'll introduce you to Richard Lee. He's a director, as I mentioned, of Core Technology and Capabilities at ACD Labs. Richard, I'm not going to read your bio. You're welcome to get into that a little bit further. I'm going to go ahead and kick back and enjoy the presentation. Again, folks, I'll be back on at the end to help with questions, and I encourage you to ask as many as you want as we go through. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. I certainly won't be going through my bio. I've been at ACD Labs for about 12 years, and I am the Director of Core Technology and Capabilities. So I'm responsible for all of the foundational technology at ACD Labs and anything new that we want to bring in. So today, I just wanted to touch on a topic that I'm sure many of you have discussed internally, and really is how to look at analytical data coming from a chemistry lab and leveraging that data for artificial intelligence or machine learning initiatives, and what are the types of technologies that are required for moving those initiatives forward. So just as a framework, I'll just touch on AI and ML. Everybody wants it, but how do you actually implement something like that? Some of the foundational technologies that are required before you even think about the AI and ML frameworks that you want to use. And looking at some of the technologies at ACD Labs and how we offer some of the analytical data management tools that will prepare you for AI and ML, and looking at some of the use cases of our technology that our clients and customers are using today. So it seems like AI and ML is the answer, but what's the question, right? It seems like everyone thinks that it will solve all your problems, but when you're starting out on your AI machine learning initiatives, you really need to figure out or determine what are the questions that you want to have answered. And then once you have those questions, then you can move on to what is the type of data that you want to use. And in this case, we're looking at analytical data that's been acquired off of scientific instruments. Moving beyond the type of data that you want to look at is then you have to think about, is the data contextualized? So is the data, does it have meaning outside of a singular data set? You also want to think about, what is the data disposition? So again, is it a single data set? Where is the data located? Is it data that's stored in databases like relational DBs, such as chromatographic data systems? Is it a discrete data file? You also have to think about the data pipeline and infrastructure that you may want to implement, right? So all of these things require to know how much data you have. Do you have the technology in place to marshal that data from various locations, from one system to another? Beyond just systems, you need to think about geographic location and sites. And then ultimately, you want to think about how will machines access this data, right? feed the data into some sort of AI machine learning framework, how is that data going to be transmitted to these machines, or how are these machines going to be accessing the data in your environment? So to touch on some of the issues such as data disposition, the problem is that the data is fragmented across vendors and technologies. So I'm sure a lot of you know, a lot of the instrument vendors and techniques or instrument techniques have their own proprietary data formats, and they are completely heterogeneous. Right? So the data themselves are not interoperable between vendor informatics systems. And the data is often siloed, right? So it's locked into proprietary databases. So for example, you have Waters, they may have their .raw file, Agilent will have .d, but even within these vendors, they will have various data formats depending on the type of instruments that the data has been acquired on, or it could be the informatics platform. So for example, you have Waters, they have LCMS instruments, they have various platforms to acquire that data. You have Masslinks that generate a discrete .raw file, so they have Empower, which houses their data in a relational database. They also have Unify or Empower's Connect. So even within a vendor, you will have different data formats and different data dispositions that you have to take into account. So what's the solution? Well, you can unify this data across these vendors, across the data formats into a standardized format, right? But again, it's easier said than done. So you have various open access data formats or generic formats like NetCDF, but there are disadvantages and limitations. For example, you may not be aware that a specific generic format, it may not be compatible with high resolution data. It may not be able to support all the metadata that's been captured in the native data file. So all the metadata, that rich information that provides context or provides provenance of that analytical data set has now been discarded because it just doesn't have the data architecture within that data format to store that information. You need to think about the data provenance and contextualization. So what is the source of that data, right? Where has it been acquired? What is the story behind that particular data set that you're looking at? Are there any process results that are retained from the instruments that you want to pull back? And what we've noticed, speaking to our customers and deploying our solutions, is that analytical data alone is not enough, right? So you need to have some sort of platform that, again, will consume that analytical data and interpret it if required. You need to have data that's accessible with retaining all the metadata, an interface that allows the end user to process and interpret that data. But again, that data must be contextualized, meaning that there has to be some additional information that gives it meaning, whether it's chemical structures or metadata that's been pulled from other informatics systems. So that analytical data set that you're looking at or that you want to use has to have context. And the data set itself must be accessible to data scientists or machines now, right? So it's beyond just a scientist in the lab. So it has to be exportable and it has to be accessible, right? Whether through JSON or other acceptable formats. You also need to think about data automation, right? Data is dispersed and it's across your organization. It's acquired across many different systems, whether it's within a lab. You can have various informatics systems, different acquisition software. You can have different labs within a site. You can have different labs across different geographic locations. So you need data automation or automation services that will essentially pull that data together from across various locations. You also need automation services that will provide that data on demand to your data consumers, whether they're the scientists in the lab or they're the data scientists or the machines that require a certain subset of that analytical data. And as I mentioned, analytical data is not enough, right? You need to have that data contextualized. You need to have automation services that will look into other systems to pull back additional metadata, whether it is ELNs, whether they're LIMS systems, chemical registration systems, document systems. You need to have context of that analytical data. So it's additional metadata, right? Or you need to add in additional, basically you need to add additional layering of that analytical data to give it some context. So the solution is to have an automation system that will monitor and transfer the data and deliver it to the appropriate data consumers. As I mentioned, data consumers, there are the scientists in the lab. They require the data to be presented for their use case. So again, chromatograms on demand, spectra on demand, so they can make quick decisions. Data scientists or machines need to have a subset of that data, right? Whether it's abstracted or processed analytical data results. But again, in both cases, the data is from the same data source. And the data itself needs to be assembled. And it's more in the context for machine learning and AI and the data scientists where the data needs to be assembled. So you need to have the appropriate metadata associated. You could have a chemical study that describes an experiment, right? Or a chemical material. You can have various types of analytical methods that describe a material, whether it's LCMS, and then orthogonal methods such as NMR. But again, giving additional information about that material characterization, right? And you need to have those types of data sets to be assembled together to tell that chemical story. So automation systems and automation services should be able to provide that type of assembly. So whatever the technology that you implement as your foundational layer for AI and machine learning, it needs to address a few items. Data consumption. The system or platform needs to be able to consume all of the major data formats across all of the major vendors. It needs to support all of your major techniques, right? So the platform itself must be allowed to unify that data, to import, convert, and unify, standardize that data so that data can be used further downstream. The platform itself should also provide data processing and interpretation tools or algorithms. So advanced algorithms to process your analytical data. For the scientists, it may require for an interface, a fully developed interface for in-depth data interpretation and processing. It should have automation services that are capable of transferring data from one location to another, perform automated processes in the back end, such as processing and interpretation and reporting, but also be able to hook into other informatics systems to pull out the relevant metadata to associate to that analytical data, to contextualize it, right? For the appropriate use case. In terms of like the non-functional end of the technology is users should be able to interact with that data from a web interface. So now they are more accustomed to using browser-based applications so that the user itself, they're not locked into a workstation. They have data accessible anytime, anywhere, simply through a web browser. The platform should also support hybrid cloud and on-premises deployment for a combination of edge computing and cloud computing technologies. It should also be scalable. Right? Whatever gets deployed should be scalable based on your organizational size. As your organization grows, the technology should be able to scale itself. If you're adding more instruments, it should also be able to scale in that sense. if there's a high load on that platform, it should be able to dynamically scale based on that instant use case, right? Where you have a number of different users that are accessing that platform. There should also be APIs that are available for that technology for systems integration, but also for having your data be made available at any time. Your data shouldn't be locked into any type of technology or platform and should be available for data abstraction or export through various APIs. For example, in JSON form, or it could be XML, or it could be text, CSV, etc. But there should be APIs available to either hook into other informatics systems or for the data that's stored in that technology to be accessible to others. So at ACD Labs, we think that we have the foundational technology that will enable organizations to really leverage their analytical data, right? And in particular, our Spectrus technology. So this is just a quick slide. Some of you may recognize it. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But in this case, it is the digital twin of that, I guess. So at the base foundational layer, you have the basic needs of having your analytical data to be available to a system, to be able to import, to process, etc. You have integrity and security for databasing and audit trails and having your data secured in whatever technology or platform. And the productivity layer. That allows for automation to play a role so that the scientists can really focus in on the science and reduce a lot of the manual burden that they have. So again, automation that plays a role in data assembly. And then ultimately, you're going to use this data for the apex, which is creating that digital twin, that predictive model, right? For us at ACD Labs, we play a role in the foundational layer from basic needs, data integrity, and productivity. So some of the highlights of our technology, we provide format standardization. That means that we can consume all of the raw data formats into our platform, to the Spectrus platform. We will convert that into our standardized format and have that data available for the end user to reprocess, reinterrogate without ever going back to the original data. That allows for the standardization of that data, meaning that the ontology and the metadata is now consistent across all of your, I guess, the other vendor data formats. So now it is now standardized and unified. We have automation services that will marshal the data from one location to another, but also perform the assembly of that data. We have interfaces available for data processing and data visualization. So you can view a lot of the live data, meaning that the data that you have now converted into our format, you can view that data within an interface, whether it's Windows client or the browser. It's fully interactive. You can reprocess, reinterrogate, and database again. You can add context to your analytical data, whether it's adding chemical structures, and that's something that we've been doing for quite some time. You can embed chemical structures into your analytical data to provide additional information or metadata that's been associated through automation services. You can push that data to a knowledge base. So again, the data is now stored in a central repository, regardless of the original vendor. The data itself is fully accessible across all users. You can query by metadata, by chemical structures, the various chemical structure queries, by spectral queries as well, and chromatographic data. And we also have the ability to integrate into other informatics systems, whether it's ELNs, CDS, or LIMS systems, or any other informatics system that plays a significant role in your IT ecosystem. So those are just the highlights, but I wanted to touch on a couple, especially the standardization and normalization of the analytical data. In particular, it is critical and paramount for AI use that the data itself is normalized and standardized. It has to be consistent, it has to be cleaned so that the data that goes into these models are useful. So for us at Spectrus, at ACD Labs, the Spectrus platform will consume all of the raw analytical data, and it will convert it into our .spectrus form. It will take all of the metadata that is stored within the vendor formats. It will convert each and single data point within the chromatograms and spectral information and make an exact carbon copy of it. It will, it's an exact copy. It's fully accessible to the end user for reprocessing purposes. We're also compatible with, as I mentioned, discrete data files. Again, a singular data file that gets created from within, let's say, Agilent or Waters or Shimadzu, etc. But we also are able to extract data that is stored within chromatographic data systems, or CDS. We're able to go into each of these CDS systems and pull out the data that's required and reassemble that data outside of that environment into a single discrete data file. So again, that means the data that's been stored in these CDS systems that are where the data is stored in a relational database, we can pull back the required data to fully reassemble that information outside of the CDS. So now that data is now fully accessible to all the scientists that want access to that data. So we cover all of the major CDS systems, as you see here. Just as a quick note about our infrastructure, our enterprise architecture, we have integration layers or systems or services, in this case, automation services, that plays a role between connecting the data sources to our other applications. Our automation services will perform the data marshaling, the data conversion, processing, export, data assembly, and again, it will integrate into other informatics systems. The end user has access to their analytical data through various interfaces through the application layer. So again, whether it's Windows client or in particular browser-based applications, we have Catalyst, which is our high throughput experimentation application that I'll touch on a little later on. Luminata, which is our project decision support that plays a role in process chemistry. Again, I will describe a little bit of that later on. But we also have, as I mentioned, web interfaces, and the way that we've designed our web tools and applications is that they can also be embedded into third-party software and applications. So again, the way that we've designed our web applications, we have these, what we call widgets that can be embedded into third-party apps. And the data itself can be stored within our Spectrus DB enterprise server. That's where we have store our all the assembled data together, but we can also push and pull data to various data lakes or data warehouses, along with supporting cloud object stores like S3 buckets or Google Cloud Storage or Azure Comet, etc. So this is just an example of a browser-based application that we have called Processor.js. This is our next generation data processing interface that's web-enabled. So here, we're viewing a fully interactive LC-UV-MS dataset. It's been acquired off of a Waters instrument and has been converted into our format. And you have access to all of the data processing tools that are on the left, visualize the chromatograms, the spectra, any tables. There is a chemical structure drawing tool that's embedded for the scientists. So again, all the scientists in the lab will have access to reprocessing or reinterrogating that data directly on a web application. This is just another view. In this case, we have NMR data that's being visualized that describes this particular compound. We have various NMR spectra that are opened at the same time, and we have interactive data processing tools, and it combines the various spectra into a single, what we call a project that the end user can process within a browser form. So they're not locked into a Windows application. They can access this web application from any browser. This is our next generation of data management tools within the browser space called Manager.js. So here, this is a representation of the database record, of a very simple, actually, database record. And this is the simplest form of assembled data, where we have a chemical structure or material in this case that has some metadata associated with it. We have various analytical data that's associated to this material. We have various NMR spectra, chromatography, mass spec data that's been part of this record that describes this chemical material. You'll be able to query based on any available metadata. So again, spectrum parameters, method information, anything that's really been in table form, you'll be able to query. Chemical structures, again, the metadata and tabulated results are viewable, and all of your analytical data is viewed in one place, right? And that's the important part. So we can assemble this data together where the end user needs to be in one place to view all of the analytical data that's available for that particular material. So these are some of the tools that are available for the scientists in the lab, right? So these are the first touch points of that analytical data. But we also have to think about how that data is going to be accessible by data scientists now, or machines. In this case, they need different tools. So at ACD Labs, we have a very rich set of Spectrus APIs to access that data. So your data is never locked into our system. It's always accessible through APIs. So you can abstract data, you can extract out into any format that you want. You can extract out specific data that's part of a database record or data set. The data itself can be accessed through configurable database views. In this case, it can be configured in the relational database, or you have ability to go into our systems using that APIs and then being able to extract out that data, whether it's in JSON, CSV, XML, etc., and have that data be made available through to third-party applications such as Spotfire or other business intelligence, AI, or machine learning frameworks. But we also have experience with machine learning and AI models, right? Not just providing the tools that enable organizations to push their data to these models. So we've had predictive models within our technology set for quite some time. So from the industry chemistry perspective, we have the gold standard for the PhysChem and ADME-Tox prediction modules, where we can predict so pKa, log-D, metabolic stability, but we're also able to predict NMR spectra. And as I mentioned, we are the gold standard for these types of predictions. We have our own internal training data set, but many of our customers and clients, they will augment that training data set with their own proprietary data to reflect their chemistry. So you can add on and refine the models that we provide with your own data. We also have integrated AI machine learning into other applications for the scientists, and in particular, the experimental design via Bayesian optimization, or EDBO+. This was integrated into our Catalyst D2D application, which is the high throughput experiment solution that I'll touch upon a little later on, and where one of our customers is actually using that today. And we're also partnering with other third-party organizations, in particular, let's say at Canary, where we're looking to integrate Spectrus with their technology. So not only do we play a role as the foundational layer to prepare your data for machine learning and AI, we also play a role or have played a role with our own predictive models and integrating other external models into our systems. So these are the technologies that we have in place. But how are our customers using our technology and preparing themselves for the next generation of AI and ML? So in terms of our customers, so our customer base, we have deployments across all of the major pharmaceutical industry, as well as the chemical space. One of the examples of our technology that's being used right now is AstraZeneca and their global analytical database, or GAD system. So for them, the need was to reduce any inefficiencies that they've observed between discovery and development groups during the drug candidate process, right? As they transitioned that material, that candidate, from the discovery phase to development, they realized that they were not leveraging and sharing that analytical data between these teams. So it was often seen that various experiments were being rerun again, simply because that analytical data was not made available to the various groups. So the need was that they needed a system, or the need for them was to be able to share that data across groups, regardless of department, group, project, etc., and have that data be made available to machines as well. But the challenge was that they have a heterogeneous set of data files to support, because they have various instruments from across a number of different vendors, as all life sciences and chemical industry has. Right? So there has to be an analytical data vendor needed to be able to import and normalize that data and deal with the heterogeneous nature of the analytical data. It needed to be highly performant. Right? So again, AstraZeneca is a global pharmaceutical company. It has multiple sites within a geographic location, but it also is across continents. So the data needed to be accessible from a number of different users across the globe at various times. So again, the system had to be performant so that the data can be reviewed or viewed on demand whenever the scientists required it. So the solution was to develop a system that will automate the data capture and provide that data to scientists on demand, right? As well as having a well-developed set of APIs so that machines can access the data, but also data scientists can access the data itself. At AstraZeneca, we needed to look at a number of different instruments. We needed to support 33 Bruker NMR instruments, 59 LC UVMS instruments across different vendors. So again, we're dealing with different data formats, proprietary data, and they wanted that data, whether it's raw or processed results, to be stored and retrievable on demand. So again, either by the scientists in the lab or by data scientists. So that was the challenge to us. The way that we were able to leverage our technology, this is just going to be a quick architecture diagram of how we were able to support them. We were able to use our automation services and our core capabilities of normalizing and standardizing that data, and using the automation services to pull data across labs within AstraZeneca and push that into their cloud environment that had our Spectrus technology deployed. But as all other pharmaceutical companies have, they have CROs that they work with, and we were able to capture the data from their partners in a very secure one-way manner. So we're able to pull data from their partners into the Spectrus platform. So they wanted the raw data or process results beyond just reports that they would get from their partners. So we were able to pull that information through our automation services, made the data available to a number of different end users, regardless of their geographic location, but also have that data be made available to systems and machines. So again, the end users would get email notifications whenever their data was ready or prepared, and that data was now made available through APIs and through JSON export for their machine learning initiatives. So for AstraZeneca, scientists now have data on demand. The data itself is centrally stored in a data repository. The heterogeneous data has been unified across vendors, and we've laid the foundation for AI and ML. So this deployment is in production at AstraZeneca and is used daily by all their scientists in the lab. Another example of our technology that's being deployed is AbbVie and their process chemistry. So the problem for them was that in process chemistry, analytical data is represented and dominated by numerical entries in Excel. They have no other informatics systems that support process chemistry data. To track impurities and project information, the data was stored in Excel, and that Excel was stored locally within that particular project. So again, nothing was shared, and there was no context to these numerical entries. So the challenge was to contextualize the process chemistry data with chromatographic and spectral information, and to automate the data capture. So to create that process map. So you want to create a process map of how the data, how you start from the starting material all the way to the final product, and associate all of the analytical data in between. And the data should be used for downstream use. So the solution was that we provided a solution for tracking process chemistry related projects, use automation services to capture the analytical data and assemble it together in the back end in an automated fashion, so the end user doesn't have to manually associate anything, and then they can review that project with all of the analytical results. For them, at AbbVie, they wanted to also integrate other informatics systems such as Mettler Toledo. In this case, it was a reaction monitoring system from Mettler using iControl. So AbbVie wanted to integrate the system with supporting Empower to create and manage process maps that can be accessed by all members, regardless of what project that they're working on, supporting the Mettler Toledo iControl reaction monitoring system, and associating that data with the analytical results. Associate analytical data to process map stages, and I'll show you what I mean by that in the next slide. Stored in the database, and again, having that data be made available for downstream use. So we were able to deploy Luminata, which is our decision support application and solution. This is just a quick screenshot. The upper left, you can create process maps where you start with the starting material, and at the very end, you have different stages as you go through until you get to the final product, and you may have different impurities, etc., at each of these stages that can be characterized with analytical data. We were able to pull that data together and display it in single interface. So this is just one interface and one data view within Luminata, but you can see you can have trend plots that are being imported from iControl in the upper right corner, where we have temperature, pressure, pH, stir rate, etc., whatever information that's available from Mettler Toledo. And below, you have trend plots of, in this case, peak areas of materials across that reaction time. So Luminata can provide trend plots, create in-process control maps. You can create a dynamic kinetic plot and view all the metadata that's associated with process chemistry. And in the case of AbbVie, they wanted to support ELN information, so metadata from ELNs, LIMS, and we were able to pull back to our automation services and push into our platform in their AWS environment, sample information, experiment, reaction schemes, etc., from various informatics systems, pull together data from iControl and data from the CDS system, and stitch that all together and assemble that data in our Spectrus platform and have that data be made available to the scientists for human access. But also that data is now made available through APIs and database views for machine access. So we were able to reduce the amount of data that scientists have to interact with in manual fashion. Scientists don't have to go through various applications to get to that data of interest. We can automate the data assembly and contextualize the process chemistry data with analytical information. And it's easily accessible across project teams. More importantly, it goes beyond just an Excel entry. Right? You can visualize the entire process map with the related analytical data to give it more context. And this is the context that you need to push into AI or machine learning initiatives. Finally, I just wanted to touch on what we have done with BMS and their high throughput experimentation project. So the problem with high throughput experimentation, or HT, it's a complex workflow, and it's often used to determine the best chemical or experimental condition. And to manage these types of workflows, you need several different applications that will support design, execution, data acquisition, that will support the actual instruments. Again, you may have robotic systems, CDS systems, other analytical systems have to be utilized to get through and manage this type of workflow. The challenge with BMS was that these systems are often disconnected. And it's not only with BMS, but in high throughput experimentation in general. These systems are often disconnected, so you have a lot of manual data association required. And as the name suggests, HTE, there are a number of experiments that are required to cover that chemical space. And it can be quite overwhelming. So how do we use AI and machine learning to reduce that, to reduce the number of experiments that are performed to get to that optimal condition? So in this case, we were able to deploy Catalyst D2D solution, which is integrating high throughput experimental design, execution, analytical data processing, and support, and integrating EDBO for enhanced chemical reaction space optimization. This is an example of how they were able to use or integrate Catalyst into their workflow. Catalyst had to support Waters and Shimadzu CDS systems, support liquid handlers and robotics. So we were able to send out instruction sets to the systems, support the execution of analytical data acquisition and processing, and making that data available for EDBO as a feedback loop for minimizing the number of experiments that are performed. So this is just an example of how BMS was able to use EDBO. This is an example of amidation reaction, where for them, they wanted to look at several different factors, 7 in this case, with 3 or up to 3 or 4 different levels. And to cover this entire design space, you would need to have 1,296 individual reactions. Right? Using EDBO, they were able to move from 1,296 possible experiments to 6 rounds of 4 reactions with a total of 24 total experiments to get to their optimal reaction. So this, as you can see, is a significant time savings in terms of experimental execution, data acquisition and processing, but also reducing the cost of materials as well. So again, this is in production at BMS, and they're using it right now. So these are some of the use cases of our technology at various clients and customers. But hopefully, I've shown you that the Spectrus platform can be integrated into your entire IT ecosystem. We can integrate into your LIMS systems, ELNs, CDS. We can import data across a number of different vendors. We can standardize that data so that it is normalized and ready for use. We are enterprise level cloud-based installations. So we can have them deployed in the cloud or hybrid deployments. The data itself is easily accessed by all users, right? Whether it is the scientists in the lab or by machines. We have automation services that are key to assemble and manage your analytical data. We can assemble and contextualize that data so that it can then be used for AI and machine learning. So we believe our technology lays a great foundation for the data scientists and any of your AI ML initiatives. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any that you have.
Great, Richard. Thank you. This is Kevin popping back on here. Great presentation, very compelling. I appreciate that. A couple things here for the folks who are on. We obviously encourage you to ask some questions. We've got a couple of minutes here to field some. I'll go ahead and get the recording stopped.